Hello and welcome to Pollinator Chat. I'm Katie Tammany with Monrovia, and I'm here with our new plants manager, Georgia Clay. Good morning, Georgia.
Good morning, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Doing great.
We're getting together this morning to talk about pollinator plants and pollinator-friendly gardening, one of the most popular topics that we hear about from our followers. And I wanted to start by first asking you, Georgia, what does a new plants manager do?
New plants manager really just looks for new plants for gardeners. My job is to make sure that what we put out in our Monrovia container is the best possible plant that you can have in your garden. We really want gardeners to be confident, have longer lasting blooms, have better features overall. So that's really my role, is just to find you the best plants that are going to work for you in your garden.
Well, it sounds like a very fun job, especially when it comes to choosing plants for pollinators. And I guess to start with, I would love to ask you exactly what are pollinators? You know, it's really become a buzzword, haha. But I'm not sure everybody knows what, who is in a pollinator group. What are we talking about?
Right, right. So pollinators really are, I think of insects, I think of birds, butterflies, all of those species of insects that are going to go onto your flowers. They're going to take the pollen, take the nectar, and transfer those to other plants around in your garden to, help with pollination. All of the insects that do that are pollinator.
So then that's birds, butterflies, bees. We're talking about
Yeah.
all of that this morning.
All of that, moths would be in that category, bats even, it's broad. Generally, when we're speaking of pollinators, we're talking about bees, your bumblebees, your honeybees, your native bees, butterflies, things like that.
Okay, great. It's a good way to start. I think another, I guess, very popular question we get from gardeners is, what's the most important thing about having a pollinator friendly garden? What do people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, if you're looking to have a pollinator garden, really the number one most important thing is just plant diversity.
Um,
Really, the more diverse your plantings are, the more diverse species of insects are going to be coming to your garden. It's just going to overall help your ecosystem. You're going to have blooms in earlier in the season to later in the season, which is going to help all of those pollinators throughout their whole life cycle.
so it's not really a style per se, it's more selecting a diverse group of plants. And I think another kind of question I have is pollinator gardening, to do it right, do you have to kind of not really care about too much perfection? I mean, you should let your garden be a little bit rambly and natural. Would you say
Yeah.
that's true?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. And I think you can find your own personal balance. There are ways to do things more formally and ways to do things more wild. But generally speaking, pollinator gardens, you're going to have a couple of leaves nibbled on by caterpillars, and that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And, if you want to keep some of your spent blooms so that the birds can eat it or bees can use it for habitat, that's all going to help your garden overall. So definitely letting go a little bit and letting things get a little bit wild is always beneficial in a pollinator garden.
Well, I think that's a great way to begin. I know people really want to hear about the best plants to attract pollinators. So let's get to your favorite plants.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you can see my screen, can you see it, Katie?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I've compiled a little list, of course, of some of my personal favorites. One being Echinacea.
Mhm.
We all think of Echinacea when we think of a pollinator garden, and that's for good reason. They have um, they have a beautiful flower. One of the things for pollinator plants is having a large landing pad, somewhere where a butterfly or a bumblebee can grasp on and get to that nectar or pollen, and that's exactly what Echinacea has. So it has that large, dense petals, and then it also the cone that we see here is actually a lot of tiny little flowers, and that's perfect for those smaller bees and pollinators as well. So
Hmm.
it's a really great plant to have in the garden. Um, They come in a huge variety of colors, shapes, sizes. This one right here, this is Evolution Colorific. It's one of my personal favorites. It's from Monrovia. It has this beautiful green cone, beautiful array of flower colors. So yellows, peaches, pinks, salmons. And it also stays nice and tidy. So, you know, you don't get really long, spindly branching that's going to flop over. It just stays really nice.
And
And
will it last for a while? I mean, the flowers, it looks like they come up kind of one color and then they change color over time, but will this echinacea keep flowering for a long period of time?
yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's another reason that I love this, because you can see here, I mean, it just puts on there in this photo, tons of blooms, and that'll just continue throughout the summer. So early summer all the way through fall, you'll have blooms on this. So a lot of nectar to be had for the pollinators when you get long blooming perennials in the garden. It's just a great all around choice. And I'm going to go on and just keep adding. So another piece is a lot of honeybees, as we know, are like to live in hives as a colony, but solitary bees do a really good job of pollinating too. A lot of our native bees, and echinacea, when the blooms are spent, the stems can act as a great habitat for overwintering in those solitary bees. So it's another added piece that you don't often think about, is that you know, when the flowers are gone and it's sort of brown, it still has a place in the garden if you don't mind that look.
You know, that goes back to what you said before about just this diversity and letting things be a little bit more wild and not looking too perfect, that sometimes pollinators, you know, need to nest or hang out in our plants when they're, you know, not blooming like crazy. So I think that's another good point to keep in mind. What else do
Mm-hmm.
you have? What else do you want to show us?
Okay, so of course, it wouldn't be a pollinator talk without the sunflower. Um, Sunflowers are one, long blooming, not all of them. Some of them are one and done, but something like the Sunbelievable Brown-Eyed Girl, gonna put on 1,000 blooms spring until the first frost. That is a huge amount of time for nectar to be had by pollinators. Absolutely gorgeous. Again, like I was saying, that large landing pad, so you can get the big pollinators, and then that cone, which is again the tiny little flowers, great for those small pollinators.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, sunflowers can be a great source of pollen and nectar. Sunbelievable is pollen free, which is great for people with allergies,
Okay.
but it's still a awesome source of nectar.
Okay.
Um,
Well, that's an interesting point. That difference, or that plants that maybe don't have the pollen can still have the nectar.
yeah.
I was curious because I know Sunbelievable you can grow it in a container too. Can you have a pollinator garden almost all in containers? Because we hear from some of our followers that they really just have a small space, and so if they want to add plants for pollinators, it's going to have to be in containers. And will that, you know, is that worth it? I guess, is that a good
Yeah,
way to go?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, container gardening is important, and any space that you can bring home for a pollinator is so welcome. And Sunbelievable would be a great container plant. And yeah, it would do just as well, equally as friendly to the bees, whether in ground or in a container. So it's awesome to do that. Especially, you know, container gardens are more in urban areas where there is less food generally for
Yeah.
pollinators. So any little oasis that you can make in your space is going to be great and much needed.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
Yeah. Okay, I've got some more. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Next would be lavender.
I
Um,
love lavender. Love it, love it, love it.
yes, it's one of the all-time favorite plants just in general. Um, there are multiple different kinds of lavender. So, you know, a Spanish lavender is going to be more hardy. So in the colder regions, you can get a Spanish lavender, beautiful silvery gray foliage. So nice look in the garden. This one, Aromatico Blue Improved, puts on a lot of flowers, which just makes more flower power, more nectar, more pollen, all those things for, bees, butterflies, moths that pollinate at night.
Mm.
All those things are going to do really nicely with English lavender. There's also, I couldn't help myself. This is from my personal garden.
Uh-huh.
This is Spanish lavender. This one is Javelin Forte.
Okay.
So this is for more of the warmer area, so zones 7 through 10. And again, they're different look, but both equally friendly for pollinators, bumblebees especially. Just really wonderful plants for the garden. And they smell nice too.
Definitely very, I don't know, they make you feel good, makes you very relaxed to have lavender,
Yeah.
that aromatherapy. I was curious, the bracts on the Spanish lavender, on the Javelin Forte, they're kind of longer. And is there any difference in terms of what's attractive to bees, between the different kind of, I guess, styles of blooms that lavender may have?
Kind of. So really I wish this photo was a little bit bigger, but where the bees would be on this Spanish lavender, the Javelin Forte, would be in this area right here.
Uh-huh.
And then the bract is more ornamental.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so that Javelin Forte has, the bracts are almost like 2 inches. They're really beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes double flowers like Echinacea, double flowers can be a little harder for pollinators to get to inside. But that's not the case for this. So you can get as showy as you want with the bracts, and the pollinators are still going to love it just as much.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great plant for many, many different species of pollinators.
And
Lavender.
I know it's pretty drought. It's very drought tolerant too, lavender in general, water wise. And during drought, people, I mean, bees and everybody, they need food more than ever. So so keeping those drought tolerant pollinator plants in the garden in the West
Yeah.
right now is a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you can see, this is my rock garden and it gets no water and
Yeah.
it's doing fantastic. Another thing is, Spanish lavenders, they time out really well. So there's many varieties on the market
Mhm.
from early blooming to late blooming to middle. So you can, if you really love lavender, you can spread that bloom out, which again, the key to another key to a pollinator garden that works really well is to have flowers throughout the season. So early spring all the way to late fall.
Right.
And you can easily do that with lavender.
Yeah.
So Agastache, another awesome pollinator plant. I really love this because hummingbirds love it.
Mhm.
Um, Hummingbirds to me, they don't, they're not a natural idea of a pollinator, but
Yeah.
they really are. Their beaks can carry pollen on it really easily. And so they do a lot of pollinating in the garden. They're also very fun to watch.
Yeah. And it's so much better than, I think, than having a the traditional sugar filled bird feeder, to actually plant something alive that the hummingbirds come to and visit. And I know that hummingbirds, because they have that long beak, they like the tubular blooms, the plants that really have like little tubes that they can poke into, work really
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, salvia, certain salvias, lobelia, some all sorts of plants like that. We'll talk about Cape fuchsia in a little bit. That's a great one too. This morello, I really adore. I think it's really a neat addition to the Agastache lineup that we have. So, we talk about the flowers for pollinators, which is fantastic. There are so many of them. They're really large, really bright, that beautiful burgundy rose red.
Mm.
But the foliage also, so, you want a pollinator garden, but you also want it to look nice when not in flower. And the morello foliage is beautiful. It's this dark, almost burgundy, dusty green. It's really nice. A lot of agastaches have great foliage, but they're all green.
Uh-huh.
And this adds a really nice contrast pop of color, even when not in flower.
Nice. I mean, I know that's a growing trend too, that our gardeners are looking for, is more interest in the foliage. So it's nice that this plant has that feature too.
Yes. Always looking for plants to do more in the garden.
Mhm.
So moving on then to sedum. Sedum's pretty diverse. You know, there's the tall sedums, there's the ground cover sedums, all sorts. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to be great for pollinators. Um, so one sedum plant can support, you know, dozens of different species. So butterflies, moths, other bees, solitary bees, honeybees. They just mine outside of my house is just buzzing with pollinators almost the whole year. It's really quite nice.
Hmm.
Uh, this one here, the Evolution Chocolate Fountain, is part of our Evolution series. And this is a great choice because, one, the foliage is gorgeous. It's really dark, deep color. The flowers are plentiful, so lots and lots of opportunity for all those species to come into your garden. Another reason I like it is because it doesn't tend to flop.
Oh,
Um, a lot of sedums will flower, then they flop over, and then you end up having to cut those flowers off. So you eliminate a lot of time that you could be enjoying. You and the pollinators could be enjoying those flowers.
huh.
And that's another reason why I really love this, because it doesn't do that. It
Yeah.
stays upright. Um,
You know, you mentioned that it can support a variety of pollinators. And we've gotten this question before, how many pollinators can one plant support? I guess when people are, they're thinking about, oh, how can I nurture as many pollinators as possible? They think about it in terms of like each plant supporting a certain amount, but should we really be thinking about it that way?
well, I don't think that's a bad way of thinking about it, but I think the best thing for pollinators is that, you know, Katie, I think you had mentioned the buffet
Yeah,
of
right,
plants.
right. Uh-huh.
Um, so really thinking about your clumps, I think of them as like rivers of certain flowers. So going throughout your landscape and having large swaths of flowers, you know, that could be 5 plants, it could be 3 plants, it could be 2,
Yeah,
whatever you can fit,
yeah.
really is going to be the best, because the more of one thing or many things that they have to feed on, the better.
Uh-huh. Got it. Got
Yeah.
it.
Uh, yeah, but anything that you can do in your garden is going to be great. If you can do more, it's always better too.
If you can.
Yeah, if you can.
Oh yeah, here's the Cape fuchsia that we were talking about. And this comes in a lot of different colors, I think, right? Too.
It
Was that correct?
I must say I did the yellow because it's my favorite,
Uh-huh.
but they're all really nice. We have red, which is actually especially attractive to hummingbirds, is the red. So in the color burst series, we have yellow, red, orange, pink, and I think I may be missing one, but I'm pretty sure it's just those 4.
It is.
Um,
I mean, yellow in a fuchsia is kind of unusual. I mean, is that one of the reasons you like it?
well, what I love about this, you know, yellow flowers typically don't really do it for me in the garden, to be
Uh-huh.
honest. But this one just, for some reason, they really pop. And just I think it's the sheer amount of blooms that the color
Yeah.
burst has on it. It's just really stunning. And it is a rather unusual color. And the stems are this sort of yellow green as well,
I feel
which,
like this could go in any palette of a garden. Like maybe you're into like whites and greens and lighter shades. That's definitely another trend. And this fuchsia would go fantastic in that garden. But it could also pair with really bright perennials and look good with really anything. So I think that it's a nice supporting player in the garden. And then I love the tubular flowers like we were talking about. That's what hummingbirds are really attracted to. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and what's nice also is that this particular series will bloom when they're shorter. So you don't have to wait for the plant to well, it'll never get 6 feet tall, which is another great point of this.
yeah.
But you don't have to wait for it to reach mature size or mature height to bloom. It's just going to put on more flowers and when it's younger as well.
Can you have this in a container too?
Yeah, this is a great plant for a container.
Okay.
If you're looking for something really tidy, Cape fuchsia, you know, they're good and bad to every plant. Cape fuchsia this one is more clumping, but it can over time spread out a little bit.
Okay.
it won't overtake, but it can spread out. So if you're looking for something to stay really nice, exactly where you planted it, it would be a great
Hmm.
for a container. Absolutely. And it's only going to be about 3 feet tall. And you can keep it shorter if you'd like to.
Great.
Yeah, fantastic. Hummingbird plant.
Ooh, that's pretty. I love yarrow.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, Yarrow's gorgeous, and it has a large role to play in a pollinator garden. One, it attracts pollinators, which is great, especially butterflies. That large landing pad again. So the
Uh-huh.
flowers on this is about 4 inches across, which is pretty large for a yarrow.
Yeah.
But yarrows also, I call them insectary plants. They're really good at attracting beneficial insects, which is another, I think, key piece to pollinator gardens, because it's all about creating the ecosystem, the environment that's healthy and beneficial to pollinators. And really the best way to do that is to have a robust sense of life in the garden. And so beneficial insects like hoverflies, lacewings, ladybugs, all of those bugs can really take care of your pests, like
Yeah, and
aphids.
then you don't need to use so many, chemical interventions, let's say,
Yeah,
when you rely on beneficials. And yeah, that's healthier all the way around.
yeah. I mean, the pollinators are insects, so the less you can spray of an insecticide to get
Yeah,
rid of your mealybugs,
yeah,
the better.
yeah.
So having plants that attract, something that's going to feast on your aphids is always
Yeah.
is going to be your best bet.
I love yarrow too because I mean it is drought tolerant, most, and it's such an unfussy kind of plant. I've almost forgotten about the yarrow that I've planted in my garden until it comes back in spring and summer, and then it's just such a happy accident that reappears. And yeah, it's fun to watch the bees on it. Now, you were talking about these plants with like really big landing pads, like the Echinacea or Unbelievable, but this is lots of little daisy-like flowers. But that still works as well, I guess.
It does, yeah, because you think about the heavy bumblebee, it's
Uh-huh.
kind of clumsy if
Yeah.
these were all separated,
Yeah.
but because they're all together, they're able to stabilize themselves
Okay.
on that pad. Yep. Yeah, so lots of different ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a great point.
And desert, I mean, yarrow, desert in particular has that great ferny foliage too. So again, the added texture even when it's not in flower.
Right. It's great.
So
I think sometimes people think that to have a pollinator garden, it needs to look like a meadow. And definitely we've seen some plants and what you're showing us that could give you that look. But if I don't really want, the sort of wildflower meadow look, is it possible to still be feeding and nurturing a lot of pollinators? Are there other plant choices I might make?
yeah, absolutely. Well, there are so many pollinator plants. I mean, roses are pollinator plants.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And
I can't forget that. That's true.
yeah, and that can be really formal if you want it to be.
Right.
So that's an option. I mean, there's just so many different options. You could even use, one thing that I love in a lot of landscape design is that, architectural statement piece that's a deep, dark evergreen, maybe like a emerald colonnade,
Mhm.
ilex, or something like that to add some structure, maybe some globed boxwoods, add some structure. And
Uh-huh.
then you can put some of the more tame cultivated varieties of these wildflower plants in between. And you really can get a pretty tidy, almost formal feel into the garden if you do it that way.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of directions you can take it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. I mean, even lace cap hydrangeas can be pollinator plants. So
That's
there's,
a good point. Good reminder.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So there's something for everybody, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Asclepius, this is milkweed.
Boy,
Uh,
talk about a hot plant these days. I mean, everybody is wanting to grow it. They've heard about it. They've heard, you're helping to save the monarch butterfly if you plant Asclepius. I think one of the key things that I find interesting is that this is a plant that the more the caterpillar uses it on its way to becoming a butterfly, the kind of, less perfect it's going to look in the garden, but that's sort of the joy of it too.
Yeah, milkweed is, I would say, maybe not for the gardener who wants the formal look,
Right.
but definitely an important pollinator plant if you want to, especially for the monarch butterfly. If you're in the pathway on their migration, this is a big deal.
Mhm.
So milkweed is actually the only source of food for the larvae of the monarch butterfly. So that's where they lay their eggs. And then the caterpillars eat the milkweed. It puts a toxin in their body,
Uh-huh.
and it makes them poisonous to the other species around them, which is
Wow,
pretty
that's really fascinating. Really fascinating. Now,
yeah.
why is it important to really try to grow the native milkweed in your
Yeah,
garden?
well, one, it's going to perform better for you.
Yeah.
And two, it's for whatever species of butterflies that you have, that's what's going to be. But really, I mean, if you're in the Midwest and you're going to try to grow this beautiful monarch magnet, it's just not going to perform very well.
Yeah.
Um, and you have this beautiful butterfly weed with this gorgeous bright orange flower anyway. So really, milkweed is one of those things that you do want to think about your native region.
Yeah.
It's really important, but there are a lot of opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of nurseries now because there's so much demand growing these.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal with the monarch butterflies. It's not just that though. They also provide nectar for a lot of different species of butterfly and bee. So not just the monarchs, but monarchs is a big host. This is a big host species for those.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great. That's pretty.
Yeah, this is so pretty. So goldenrod sometimes gets a bad rap for being an allergen, but
Huh.
it's not. It's in bloom at the same time as a lot of allergens, but goldenrod,
Oh,
the pollen is really dense and sticky, so it's not going to blow, which is great.
that's funny. It gets a bad reputation because of who it hangs out with.
Yes, yes, yes. But if you plant in your garden, not to worry.
Uh-huh.
So
Good.
Crown of Rays is one variety that we at Monrovia are growing, but goldenrod in general is fantastic. This is really critical for, again, the monarch butterfly.
Oh,
It's when they are feeding, so not just the caterpillar this time, but this is the actual butterfly. It's a good source of nectar for them in the fall when they're migrating to Mexico.
okay. Huh.
So
So
this
really good to have like later in the summer and into fall in your garden.
Yes. So this is a perfect, we talked earlier about early bloomers and late bloomers, and goldenrod is one of the most important late bloomers in the garden.
Huh. Wow.
It's really nice. It's super heavy, nectar rich.
Uh-huh.
It just produces a ton at a really critical time. And at that time, it's hard to find. All the pollinators get their fill in the summer, and then the fall comes and they're kind of
They're looking for the next buffet.
yes, yeah, they're looking. So this is a great choice
Uh-huh.
in the and it's nice, 3 feet tall by 2 feet wide, so it's pretty well behaved. It's not going to get out of control, and this color is pretty vibrant and really
Oh,
beautiful.
pretty. And again, it would go with so many different garden styles, garden looks, I think. It makes a nice partner to lots of different colors in other perennials, shrubs. It's really,
Yeah.
really pretty.
hmm These are also really tolerant of urban pollution, so great for people who maybe have container gardens
Uh-huh.
or have or live in more dense areas. They really do well in those areas too, not
Great.
just for the wild meadow.
Great. Ooh, lilac. Well, actually, Ceanothus. I love Ceanothus.
I do too.
I had heard too from a friend, because it's so prevalent in California that the Native Americans, Ceanothus growing naturally in the Central Coast, Native Americans would use it as soap. Like if you rub your hands on the blooms, it's cleansing and leaves a really nice fragrance. So but very clean fragrance. So it doesn't surprise me that it would attract pollinators as well.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Yeah, this is just a great plant, and I think it's a little different. You know, we've talked a lot about perennials,
Mm-hmm.
and then here's an evergreen shrub. So awesome for adding structure. We talked about adding structure. This is great for that. So you can make this look really formal if you wanted. You could let it get a little wild if you wanted. Whatever you want to do with this would be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Um, it does have these beautiful cobalt blue flowers. And mine is just literally buzzing with
Yes.
pollinators.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, you could really hear it. It's like this vibrating plant, you know? Yeah.
yeah, and there's so many. If you look, you know, bumblebees, honeybees, sweat bees. I mean, any type you
Uh-huh.
can find. So it hosts a very diverse species of
Uh-huh.
pollinators. One of my
Now,
absolute
if I
favorites.
don't want it to get this big, can I keep it kind of compact, you
Uh-huh.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, yep. With you can prune anytime, really. You know, it blooms in the spring,
Mhm.
so you can prune it after it blooms. You can prune it in the winter if you wanted.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, this shears really well. It takes to pruning really well. It's a great grower, really drought tolerant. So after the first year, you don't have to water it really at all.
I've
Um,
definitely found that in my garden. It's in the dry, sunny spot that doesn't get any additional water. So
So it's a great plant, and Victoria in general is more cold hardy. So
uh-huh.
if you're, I'm in a zone 8, and sometimes Ceanothus can be borderline, but Victoria has no problems for
Oh,
me.
okay. That's great.
Yeah, so it's a really nice, and of course when it's not in flower, it has that deep, dark emerald green foliage,
Yeah, I
which is
love it. It's really glossy. It looks really nice. Yeah.
yeah, it's gorgeous. Yeah, one of my absolute favorite plants.
Mhm.
hmm Okay,
Ooh, I love this one.
last one, I promise. So this is another vein of late season pollinator plants. Um, Labar blue, yes, it's gorgeous.
So striking.
It is. Because you have in the spring and summer, or early summer, you have the bright gold foliage.
Uh,
And it just looks beautiful against all your other backdrop of things that are kind of going off at that prime time. And it doesn't burn in the sun, which is great. A lot of gold foliage will burn in the sun, and this one doesn't.
mm-hmm. Well, I like the
Uh,
dark stems too. You know, it's just really that's part of the striking look.
Yeah, a lot of contrast going on. Then in the late summer, when the bees are looking for things to be had, this comes into flower. So it's perfectly timed. It's a great late season addition to the garden.
Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah, really a great size. You can tuck it in really anywhere. It's 3 feet tall by a little less so wide. So
Mm-hmm.
perfect to just tuck in where you can. Bring in some late season pollinators to the garden. They'll really enjoy this one.
Huh. Yeah,
Mm.
I feel like it's not like anything I've seen before, you know, that color contrast with the foliage and the blooms. I feel like if you want something really different and eye-catching, this is a good option.
Yeah, both the foliage and the flowers, and it puts on a ton of flowers.
Yeah.
It really does bloom a lot from late summer all the way through the fall.
So you were talking about planting, you know, like a river, or, you know, we were talking about the buffet that you want to put out for pollinators. Is it, you know, a bad thing, good thing, or neither one to plant like a mass of something, you know, a huge bank of the same plant? Or do you really want to, you know, plant different kinds of? Are you going to serve a diverse group of pollinators if you have a diverse group of plants, I guess is my question.
Yeah, well, yes to both.
Yeah.
You'll definitely depends on what your goals are.
Uh-huh.
I think large swaths of plants, big with one plant is stunning. It
Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
and while it's in bloom, it is giving a lot of food to a lot of different pollinators, depending on the plant. But most likely, it's hosting a diverse palette of pollinators.
Uh-huh.
But if your goal is to have the longest time period where you're hosting the pollinators, your best bet is to have,
That's a good
mixed.
point. Yeah, if you really want to extend the season, like you were saying, with Goldenrod or even Labarre Blue, a little bit later, um,
Mhm.
to keep the pollinators happy
Yeah,
longer in your garden. It's a
yeah.
really good point.
Or just choosing ones that are, if you wanted to do a mass planting, there are quite a few plants. I mean, we talked about the Sunbelievable
Uh-huh.
sunflower. That one looked beautiful planted in mass. And two, they bloom from, I think, early or mid late spring all the way through fall.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that is quite a lot of pollinator time.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So
That's
it's really
really,
case
yeah,
dependent.
that's really doing your part, if you think about spring through fall.
Thank you, Georgia. Just want to let all of our gardeners know that all of these plants are available on monrovia.com. You can find out more. And I'd like to ask Georgia, any last words of advice for our gardeners?
Key is just have fun, follow your heart, do what you love. The pollinators will come.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. And look out for more future chats with Georgia and myself as we tackle the interesting trends and topics that gardeners want to know about. Thanks, Georgia.
Thanks, Katie.